My brothers tried to sell Dad's ranch without me, until the lawyer revealed the hidden deed under the barn. It was a place I thought was lost to memory, a ghost limb of a life I'd been forced to amputate. And if you've ever felt cut out by your own family, like a footnote in your own story, stick around. This story is for you. Maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk about what it means to inherit something more than just dirt and debt. The call came on a Tuesday. The sky outside my dorm window was the color of a wet sidewalk, a flat, unforgiving gray that matched the cinder block walls of my room. I was 21, technically an adult, but I felt like a parcel someone had forgotten to mail. 2 years of state college, 2 years of carefully constructed numbness since Dad's funeral. 2 years of pretending I didn't hear the silence where his voice should have been. Then the phone buzzed, a harsh, insistent vibration against my particle board desk. It was Mark, my oldest brother. "Leo, you there?" His voice was the same as always, impatient, as if the world was a slow driver in front of him. "I'm here, Mark. What's up?" I tried to sound casual, like he hadn't just interrupted the delicate process of me staring at a textbook I hadn't opened in a week. "Listen, I don't have a lot of time. David and I have a situation here, with the ranch." My stomach tightened. The ranch. I hadn't been back in nearly a year. It was a place of ghosts, of long summer evenings and the smell of hay. But now it was just an address, a line item in the slow, grinding dissolution of our family. "What kind of situation?" I asked, my own voice sounding small and distant. "An opportunity," he corrected, his tone sharpening. "A big one. A developer wants the land, all of it. They're putting in a resort community or something. Golf course, condos, the whole 9 yards. The offer is significant, Leo, life-changing." I could hear the unspoken words hanging in the air. Money we desperately need. Money to fix the problems Dad left behind. My brothers had always seen the ranch as a burden, a dusty, failing monument to a man they loved but didn't understand. I saw it as the last piece of him that was still breathing. "They want to buy it?" I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Buy the ranch?" "Yes, buy it. Pay attention," Mark sighed, a gust of static-filled frustration. "The offer is 7 figures, Leo, enough to clear all the debts, set us all up. David's got kids to think about. I've got my business. You could finish school without drowning in loans. This is a clean slate for all of us." A clean slate. The phrase felt like an eraser scrubbing away my father's signature. "What about Dad? He loved that place." "Dad's gone," Mark said, and the bluntness of it was like a slap. "He held on too long, you know that. He ran it into the ground. We're being practical. It's what he would want." I knew that was a lie. My father would rather have lost a limb than that land. It was in his bones, in the calluses on his hands, in the quiet way he'd watch the sunset from the porch as if he were checking on an old friend. "We need you to come home," Mark continued, his voice shifting from impatient to commanding. "The lawyers have the paperwork ready. We need all 3 signatures. I booked you a bus ticket for tomorrow morning. It'll be at the station. We'll get this done Thursday, and we can all move on." He didn't ask, he told. It was the story of my life with them, the youngest brother, the afterthought. I was a box to be checked, a signature on a line. The bus ticket was a summons, not an invitation. I looked around my tiny room, at the stacks of books and the single, sad-looking plant on the windowsill. This wasn't a life, it was a holding pattern. And now they were calling me back to rubber stamp the final demolition of my past. "Leo, did you hear me?" Yeah, I said, my throat dry. I heard you. I'll be there. The line went dead before I could say anything else. I held the silent phone in my hand, the gray light from the window making it look like a smooth, dark stone. A clean slate. The words echoed in the quiet room. But some slates, I thought, were covered in writing you were never meant to erase. The kind of writing that told you who you were. The bus ride home was 8 hours of watching the world blur past the greasy window. The city's concrete towers bled into sprawling suburbs, then into the flat, tidy farmland of the state's interior, and finally into the familiar rolling hills and dense pine forests of home. Each mile felt like a step backward in time. I thought about Mark and David. Mark, the eldest, was a born salesman, all sharp angles and quick decisions. He'd left for the city the moment he could, building a small contracting business that was always, according to him, on the verge of taking off. David was the middle child, the family man, softer than Mark, but burdened by a quiet anxiety that made him perpetually tired. He worked a steady job at a local plant, had a wife and 2 kids, and a mortgage that was a constant, low-grade hum of stress in his life. They were good men, I suppose. They just weren't Dad. They saw the world in dollars and cents, in assets and liabilities. Dad saw it in seasons, in the health of the soil, in the loyalty of a good dog. They spoke different languages, and I was fluent in both, which meant I was a translator for a conversation that had ended 2 years ago. The bus wheezed into the station in my hometown, a place that seemed to have been pickled in the 1980s. The air smelled different here, damp earth, pine needles, and the faint, greasy scent of the diner across the street. David was waiting for me, leaning against his sensible minivan. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with new lines of worry around his eyes. He gave me a one-armed, awkward hug. "Hey, Leo, good trip?" "It was a bus," I said. We weren't a family that did small talk well. The drive to the house we grew up in was quiet. It wasn't Dad's house at the ranch, but the small 2-story in town he'd bought after Mom left, the place we'd all launched from. Mark's car, a sleek, dark sedan that looked out of place on the cracked asphalt, was already in the driveway. The confrontation was waiting inside. The air in the house was stale, scrubbed clean of Dad's familiar scent of sawdust and coffee. Mark had taken over, and his presence was in the minimalist, impersonal tidiness of the living room. He was on the phone, pacing, but hung up as we walked in. "Leo, good, you're here," he said, shaking my hand like a business partner. "Let's not waste time. I've got the offer right here." He spread a sheaf of papers across the dining room table, blueprints, contracts, numbers with an intimidating amount of zeros. The company was called Pioneer Valley Estates. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were pioneers of pavement, erasing the very thing the original pioneers had worked for. "Look at this," Mark said, tapping a glossy architectural rendering of a golf course where Dad's best pasture used to be. "They're not lowballing us. This is top dollar. 2.4 million, Leo. After the lawyers and clearing the estate's debts, we each walk with over 600,000. Free and clear." David watched me, his expression a mixture of hope and apology. "It would change everything for us, Leo. For my kids' college, for Mark's business, for you." "Dad left debts?" I asked, looking at the numbers. It was the first I'd heard of it. Mark sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Of course he left debts. He was sentimental, not stupid. The place hasn't turned a profit in a decade. He was taking out second and third mortgages just to keep the lights on. We're lucky we're not completely underwater. This offer isn't just a windfall, it's a lifeline. He made it sound so reasonable, so logical. A drowning family being thrown a rope. But I felt like they were trying to sell the ocean itself. I looked at their faces, my brothers, and saw strangers. They had already mourned, processed, and moved on. They were closing a ledger. I was still standing at the graveside. "I need to think about it," I said quietly. Mark's face hardened. "Think about what? Leo, this is a no-brainer. There's nothing to think about. We sign, we get the money, we move on with our lives." "It's Dad's home," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's the only thing we have left of him. You can't just sell it to the first person who writes a check. It's a failing plot of land with a mountain of debt attached," Mark shot back, his voice loud in the quiet house. "It's a memory, a nice one, sure, but it's not worth bankrupting our futures over. Grow up." The words hit me like a physical blow. Grow up. As if my grief, my connection to our father, was a childish fantasy I needed to discard. I saw the disappointment in David's eyes, not because of what Mark said, but because I was being difficult, because I was the obstacle standing between him and a life without financial fear. I was the problem. "I'm not signing anything today," I said, my jaw tight. "I want to go out to the ranch. I want to see it one more time." "For God's sake, Leo," Mark exploded. "What are you going to do, commune with his ghost? The place is a wreck." "I don't care," I said, standing up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I'm going out there. You can have my signature when I'm ready to give it. Or not at all." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Without my signature, there was no deal. I had a power I didn't even know I wanted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the little brother being told what to do. I was a roadblock. I grabbed the keys to Dad's old pickup from the hook by the door, the metal worn smooth and familiar in my palm. David started to say something, a soft plea, but I was already out the door, letting the screen door slam shut behind me. The sound echoed the slamming of a door in my heart, a door that had once connected me to my brothers. I wasn't sure if it would ever open again. The drive was 20 minutes of gravel roads and ghosts. Dad's old truck rattled and groaned, a familiar symphony of aging metal. The engine smelled of oil and gasoline, a scent so deeply tied to him, it felt like he was sitting in the passenger seat next to me. I passed landmarks of my childhood. The old oak tree we'd tried and failed to build a treehouse in. The creek where David once broke his arm falling off the rope swing. The crest of the hill where the whole valley opened up below. And there it was, the ranch. Mark was right about one thing. It was a wreck. The white paint on the farmhouse was peeling, curled up like sunburnt skin. The porch sagged on one end. The fields, once neat rows of alfalfa or grazing pasture for a small herd of cattle, were overgrown with weeds, a chaotic tangle of green and brown. The whole place looked tired, like it had given up. A storm was brewing in the west, the clouds a dark, bruised purple, and a cold wind whipped through the tall grass, making it hiss. The weather felt like it was morning, too. I parked the truck and just sat for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. This was the place where Dad had taught me to drive, where I'd learned to mend a fence, to read the sky for rain. It was the place I'd run to after my first heartbreak, and he'd just sat with me on the porch, not saying a word, which was everything I needed. Selling this place felt like selling those memories, packaging them up for strangers to bulldoze. I finally got out and walked toward the barn. It was a massive structure, older than the house, its timber frame silvered with age. The great doors groaned on their rusted hinges as I pushed them open. The air inside was thick with the holy trinity of barn smells: old hay, dust, and dry earth. Shafts of light cut through the gloom from gaps in the roof, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny, frantic spirits. Everything was just as he'd left it. His workbench was cluttered with tools, a half-finished wood carving of a hawk sitting in the center. His old canvas coat was hanging on a peg, its shape still holding the ghost of his shoulders. I felt a profound, aching loneliness. My brothers saw debt and decay. I saw a life, a good one. I wandered through the cavernous space, my boots kicking up dust. I ran my hand along the rough-hewn wood of a stall. I remembered the horse that used to live here, a gentle old mare named Daisy. I climbed the ladder to the hayloft and looked out the high window over the sad, neglected fields. The wind was picking up, rattling the tin roof. I needed a sign. I needed something, anything, to tell me what to do. Was I just being a sentimental fool, as Mark said? Was I holding them all back from a better life because I couldn't let go? I came back down and stood in the center of the barn, feeling small and lost. My foot scuffed against a floorboard that gave a little more than the others. I kicked at it idly. It was loose. I knelt, my knees cracking, and worked my fingers into the gap. With a groan of old wood, the board came up in my hand. Beneath it wasn't just dirt. There was a dark square of metal, the lid of a box set flush into the earth. My heart started hammering against my ribs.
What was this?
Dad was a practical man, but he had a streak of the poet in him, a love for the hidden and the meaningful. This felt like him. This felt like a secret. Just as I was reaching for the handle on the box, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. I froze, my mind racing. Mark and David coming to pressure me again? But the engine sound was wrong. It was a low, steady rumble, not the aggressive growl of Mark's sedan or the whine of David's minivan. I stood up, peering through a grimy window pane. An old, impeccably clean Buick was pulling to a stop next to Dad's truck. An elderly man in a tweed jacket and a neatly combed head of white hair got out. Mr. Abernathy, Dad's lawyer and one of his oldest friends. My heart leaped. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was an ally. He was the keeper of my father's stories. And his timing felt like more than a coincidence. It felt like a message. Mr. Abernathy walked toward the barn with a slow, deliberate gait, his expression unreadable. He saw me standing in the doorway, framed by the dark interior. He gave a small, sad smile. "Leo," he said, his voice a calm, reedy tenor. "I had a feeling I might find you here. Your brother Mark called me. He's displeased." "That's one word for it," I said, stepping out into the wind, which was now whipping my hair across my face. "He wants me to sign. They both do." "I know," Mr. Abernathy said, his eyes scanning the dilapidated state of the farm with a practiced melancholy. He'd seen this place in its prime. "They see a solution. A simple one. Your father, however, was rarely a simple man." He looked from the barn to me, his gaze sharp and intelligent. "He knew this day would come, Leo. He knew his boys. He knew Mark's ambition, David's worry, and he knew your heart." My throat felt thick. "What do you mean?" "He made provisions," the old lawyer said, his eyes twinkling with a secret. "A final instruction. He told me that if your brothers ever moved to sell this place against your wishes, I was to come here, to this barn. He said you'd know where to look." He glanced down at my dusty hands, then at the open space in the floor just inside the barn door. And it appears you do. I led him inside, my pulse thrumming. The air felt charged, electric with the approaching storm and the weight of this moment. I pointed to the exposed metal box. "It's right here. I just found it." Mr. Abernathy nodded, a slow, satisfied motion. Just as he said, "Your father believed the land speaks to those who listen. It seems it spoke to you." He knelt beside me, surprisingly spry for his age. The box was an old military-style ammo can, painted black. It wasn't locked, but the clasp was stiff with rust. It took both of us to pry it open. The screech of metal was the only sound in the barn besides the howling wind. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, yellowed wool, was a large manila envelope sealed with wax, and on top of it, a smaller, thicker envelope with my name, Leo, written in my father's familiar, strong handwriting. And beneath that, another legal-looking document tied with a faded red ribbon. "What is all this?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "That," Mr. Abernathy said, pointing to the ribbon-tied document, "is the real deed to this property. The one filed with the county is a standard inheritance deed, splitting it 3 ways. Your father had that one drawn up as a placeholder. This one is different. It's a survivorship deed with a testamentary trust provision. He called it his contingency plan." He picked up the large manila envelope. "And this," he said, his voice growing softer, "is his explanation. He wanted you to have it, all of it." He handed the heavy envelope to me. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was the physical manifestation of my father's foresight, his love, his complicated plan. I looked from the box to the old lawyer, whose face was full of a gentle sympathy. The first drops of rain began to spatter against the tin roof, a slow, mournful drumbeat. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. This was a conversation with my father, reaching out from beyond the grave. And I had a sinking feeling that whatever he had to say was going to tear my world apart before it could ever hope to put it back together. The truth was here, in this dusty barn, in a metal box buried beneath the floorboards, waiting to be read. Mr. Abernathy seemed to understand my need for solitude. "I'll leave you with it, son," he said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Your father's words are for you alone. Read them. Understand what he was asking of you. The legalities can wait. What matters is what's in here." He tapped the envelope with my name on it. "Call me when you're ready. Whatever you decide, I'll be there to help you see it through." He gave my shoulder a final squeeze and walked out into the now steady rain, his old Buick disappearing down the muddy lane like a ship receding into the fog. I was alone again, but not truly. The barn was filled with my father's presence, with the weight of his final words held tight in my hands. The rain was coming down harder now, a relentless drumming on the roof that seemed to wash the world clean, leaving only this moment, this place, this choice. I sat down on an overturned bucket, the cold metal seeping through my jeans. The air was cool and damp, smelling of rain and wet earth. I broke the wax seal on the large envelope first, the one containing his explanation. Inside were several pages of his familiar, slightly slanted handwriting on yellow legal paper. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Leo, Mark, and David," it began. It was addressed to all of us. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are facing a decision about the ranch. I imagine this decision is not a united one. I know my boys. Mark, you see the future, the bottom line, the path of least resistance to success. David, you see the risks, the family you must protect, the security that this land has failed to provide. And Leo, you, my youngest, you see the past. You see the soul of this place. None of you are wrong. You are just looking at the same mountain from different sides. I need you to understand why I held on, why I fought so hard for a place that, by all practical measures, was failing. This land was not a business to me. It was a promise. It was the place my father built from nothing, the place where I learned what it means to be a man. It taught me that value isn't always measured in dollars. It's measured in sweat, in sunsets, in the satisfaction of a mended fence, in the knowledge that you are a steward of something that was here before you and will be here long after. It's a library of memories. Your first steps were taken on that porch. I taught all three of you to ride a bike in this very barn. Your mother and I planted that big maple by the creek the year Mark was born. I know about the debts. Don't think for a second I was a fool. Every loan, every lien was a calculated risk, a desperate bet I made to buy one more season, one more year, hoping things would turn around. I failed in that. As a businessman, I failed. I leave you with that burden, and for that, I am truly sorry. It's a heavy weight, and it is not fair. Which is why the offer to sell must seem like a godsend. To Mark and David, it is the only logical path, a way to undo my failures and secure your futures. But there is another kind of value and another kind of future, and that, Leo, is where you come in. My eyes blurred with tears. I had to stop and wipe them away with the back of my dusty hand. The rain was a torrent now, a deafening roar on the roof. I felt so exposed, so seen by him. He had understood us all so perfectly. I picked up the smaller, thicker envelope, the one with just my name on it. My hands were trembling as I opened it. This was the heart of it. My Leo, the letter inside began. This letter is for you alone, because the choice I am about to give you is one only you can make. Your brothers will not understand it. They will see it as a betrayal, as favoritism. It is neither. It is a burden, and it is a gift. It is the heaviest thing I will ever ask of you. The deed you found with this letter is the true and final one. Mr. Abernathy will explain the legal terms, but the spirit of it is this. The ranch cannot be sold unless there is unanimous agreement among my three sons. However, it contains a stewardship clause. If one son chooses to live on and work the land for a period of 5 consecutive years, sole ownership and control of the property transfers to him at the end of that period. He can then choose to sell it, keep it, or pass it on as he sees fit. His brothers would be bought out at the land's original appraised value at the time of my death, not at any inflated developer's price. I am not asking you to do this, Leo. I am giving you the choice. You can sign the papers with your brothers. You can take the money, finish your education, build a life free from this place and its ghosts and its debts. There is no shame in that. It is the sensible path. No one, least of all me, would blame you. Or you can choose the other path, the hard path. You can stay. You can fight for this place. You can take on the debts, the back-breaking work, the loneliness. You can try to bring it back to life. You would have to learn so much, to sacrifice your youth in a way your brothers never had to. You would, for a time, lose them. They will be angry, and I cannot protect you from that anger. Why would I ask such a thing of you? Because I see my father in you. I see the same quiet love for the land. You were always the one who stayed out with me until the work was done, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. You noticed the little things, the hawk nesting in the north pasture, the way the creek runs high in the spring. Your brothers see a property. You see a home. I am not giving you the ranch, Leo. I am giving you the chance to earn it, to see if that love you have for it is strong enough to save it, and to save a piece of me with it. Whatever you choose, know that I love you. Know that I am proud of the man you are becoming. Be brave. Be good. Your loving father. I finished the letter, and my whole body was shaking. It was a sob that started deep in my chest, a raw, ragged sound of grief and terror, and a terrible, beautiful clarity. He hadn't given me an inheritance. He'd given me a challenge that could define my entire life. He was offering me a purpose wrapped in hardship. The easy money and a broken family, or a life of struggle and a chance to honor him. The choice was brutal. It was unfair. And in that moment, sitting in the roaring darkness of the barn, I already knew what I had to do. The path of least resistance had never been my way. It hadn't been his either. I spent the night in the old farmhouse. I couldn't bear to go back to town, back to the suffocating tension of my brother's expectations. I found a dusty blanket in a linen closet and curled up on the old sofa in the living room, the one with the worn floral pattern where I'd spent countless hours reading as a kid. The storm raged outside, a wild symphony of wind and rain that matched the tempest in my soul. Sleep was impossible. I lay there in the dark, my father's letters on my chest, their weight both a comfort and a crushing burden. I thought about the life the money could buy me. A nice apartment, a reliable car, no student debt. A future that was simple, comfortable, and unwritten. It was the American dream, or some version of it. It was the life my brothers wanted for me, for themselves. A life free from the anchor of this failing land. But then I thought about what I would lose. I would see this place, this living library of my father's life, turned into a soulless landscape of manicured lawns and identical houses. Every time I drove past, I would see the ghost of our barn replaced by the 9th hole, the ghost of our farmhouse replaced by a community pool. I would have traded my father's legacy for a number in a bank account. The money would eventually be spent, but the loss would be permanent. It would be a void that would follow me for the rest of my days. The stewardship clause was a monumental task. 5 years. It was an eternity at 21. It meant putting my own dreams on hold, or discovering that this was my dream all along. It meant facing my brother's fury, a prospect that terrified me. We hadn't been close since Dad died, but they were still my brothers. The thought of that bond shattering completely was a pain all its own. But my father's letter, he hadn't commanded me. He had trusted me. He had seen something in me that I wasn't sure I saw in myself. Resilience, a connection to his world, a heart that valued soul over soil. He wasn't trapping me. He was liberating me. He was giving me a chance to choose my own life, not just drift into one. The choice wasn't between money and land. It was between who my brothers thought I was and who my father hoped I could be. The storm finally broke just before dawn. The rain softened to a gentle patter, and a sliver of pale, watery light appeared on the eastern horizon. I got up from the sofa, my body stiff and cold, and walked out onto the porch. The world was washed clean. The air smelled of wet pine and rich, dark earth. The fields were soaked, but the green of the weeds looked vibrant, alive. A single hawk, maybe a descendant of the one my father had written about, was circling high overhead, catching the first rays of the sun. In the quiet, clean morning, the choice was no longer a choice. It was a certainty. It was the only path that felt true. I drove back into town later that morning, my father's letters and the real deed tucked safely in the glove compartment. I called Mr. Abernathy first. "I've made my decision," I told him, my voice steady. "I thought you might," he said calmly. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to meet me at the house in an hour, with my brothers. It's time we all talked." When I walked into the house, Mark and David were sitting at the dining room table, a fresh pot of coffee between them. Their faces were grim. They looked like they hadn't slept either. "Well," Mark said, not bothering with a greeting, "are you done with your spiritual journey? Ready to sign the papers and join the real world?" "Sit down, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It surprised them. I'd never used that tone with them before. They both stared at me as I took a seat across from them. Just then the doorbell rang. David went to get it and returned a moment later with Mr. Abernathy, who carried a worn leather briefcase. Mark's eyes narrowed. "What's he doing here? This is a family matter." "He's here as Dad's lawyer," I said, "and as mine." I laid the envelope with my name on it on the table. "Dad left some things for us, for me, out at the barn." I explained everything. I told them about the loose floorboard, the metal box, the letters. I didn't let them read the letters. Those words were sacred, private, but I summarized the parts that concerned them. I told them about the debts, how Dad knew he was failing, how sorry he was for the burden he'd left them. David's face softened with a flicker of old grief, but Mark's remained a mask of impatience. Then I told them about the real deed. That's not possible," Mark stammered, looking at Mr. Abernathy for confirmation. The old lawyer simply opened his briefcase and produced a notarized copy of the deed my father had hidden. He slid it across the table. "It's perfectly legal, Mark. A testamentary trust with a stewardship provision. Your father was very specific in his instructions." Mark snatched the paper and read it, his face growing darker with every line. David read over his shoulder, his expression turning from confusion to disbelief. "A stewardship clause?" Mark finally choked out, his voice shaking with rage. "He's giving him the whole thing. After 5 years? This is insane." "He's not giving it to me," I said, my voice level. "He's giving me a choice, and he's giving you one too. We can sell if we all agree. The original offer still stands." A wave of relief washed over David's face. "Well, there then. Let's just agree. Leo, you can't be serious about this. 5 years? Working that place alone? It's a death sentence." "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Mark snarled, turning on me. He wasn't looking at David anymore. His focus was entirely on me, his eyes burning with accusation. "You go out there, play the grieving son, and suddenly you find a magic deed that gives you everything? This is a scam." "It's not a scam, Mark. It's what Dad wanted. Dad wanted us to be a family. He wouldn't turn us against each other like this," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table, rattling the coffee cups. "He didn't turn us against each other," I said, the truth of it landing with a heavy, sad finality. "We did that ourselves. You decided to sell this place without even talking to me, without asking me how I felt. You just summoned me here to sign a piece of paper. You treated me like a child, like my feelings about Dad, about our home, didn't matter." The accusation hit home. David had the grace to look ashamed, dropping his gaze to the table. Mark just got angrier. "So this is revenge? You're going to bankrupt us all for some perceived slight?" "No," I said, and this was the hardest part. I took a deep breath. This is my decision. I'm invoking the stewardship clause. I'm not selling. I'm staying. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a silence filled with the shattering of brotherly bonds, with the death of a shared history. David looked like he was going to be sick. Mark's face was pale, his lips a thin, white line. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping back. You're choosing a ghost. You're choosing a pile of dirt and debt over your own family. I'm choosing to honor my father's last wish, I said, my heart breaking. I'm choosing the part of him that he left for me to take care of. Then you're a fool, Mark whispered, his voice dripping with contempt. And you're on your own. Don't you dare come asking us for a damn thing when you're starving in a year. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a brother named Leo anymore. He turned and walked out of the house without another word. The slam of the front door was a gunshot. David looked at me, his eyes full of tears and a terrible, conflicted pain. Leo, please, he begged, don't do this. Think about my kids. I am, I said softly. I'm thinking about what kind of man I want to be when I look them in the eye. I can't sell our father's heart, David. I'm sorry. He shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He stood up and walked away, not with Mark's anger, but with a profound, bone-deep sorrow. He didn't slam the door. He just closed it quietly behind him, which was somehow worse. I was left alone at the table with Mr. Abernathy. The house was utterly silent. I was the king of a ruined kingdom, the sole heir to a legacy of hardship. The choice was made. The consequences were just beginning. And I had never felt so alone or so determined in my entire life. The first few weeks were a blur of overwhelming reality. The ranch, which had been a symbol and a memory, was now a long and brutal to-do list. The farmhouse roof had a leak. The well pump was unreliable. The fences in the north pasture were more holes than wire. And the debt was a constant, looming shadow. Mr. Abernathy helped me consolidate what I could, setting up a payment plan with the bank that was, to put it mildly, intimidating. The loan officer, a man with tired eyes and a skeptical frown, looked at me like I was a kid playing dress-up in his father's oversized clothes. Maybe I was. My brothers were ghosts. Mark's threat wasn't idle. My calls went to voicemail, my texts unanswered. David answered once, his voice strained and distant. His wife, he said, was furious. They had been counting on that money. He wished me luck, but it sounded like an epitaph. The family I knew was gone, fractured by a choice I'd made in a dusty barn. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold weight in my gut, especially in the evenings, when the sun went down and the house filled with shadows and silence. There were days I was sure I'd made a catastrophic mistake. One afternoon, trying to fix a section of fence, I cut my hand badly on a piece of rusted wire. I sat on the ground, blood dripping into the dirt, and I just cried. I cried for my dad, for my lost brothers, for my own stupidity and weakness. I was in over my head, a college kid with soft hands and a romantic notion, trying to tame a wilderness that had already beaten a stronger man. But then, slowly, something began to shift. It started with small victories. The day I finally patched the leak in the roof, I stood in the dry attic during a rainstorm and felt a surge of pride so fierce it startled me. The day I got the old tractor to turn over, its diesel engine coughing to life with a plume of black smoke, I whooped so loud, the crows in the nearby trees took flight. Each mended fence post, each cleared field, each paid utility bill was a tiny piece of proof. Proof that I could do this. Proof that I was worthy of my father's trust. The community started to notice. Earl, an old rancher who had been Dad's friend, stopped by one day. He was a man carved from oak, with hands like gnarled roots. He didn't say much. He just looked at my clumsy fence repair, spat a stream of tobacco juice, and said, "Your dad used a tensioner. Got one in your barn?" He spent the next 2 hours showing me how to do it right, how to make the wires sing with tautness. He never mentioned my brothers or the sale. He just taught me. Another time, I was at the local diner, staring at a plate of eggs I couldn't really afford, when the owner, a woman named Maria, slid a piece of pie in front of me. "On the house," she said with a warm smile. "Your father always said my apple pie could solve most of the world's problems." It was a small gesture, but it felt enormous. It was a thread of connection, a quiet welcome back into the fold of my father's world. I wasn't just fixing a ranch, I was rebuilding a life. I was learning the rhythms of the land, the language of the seasons. I found a new kind of education in the pages of old almanacs and farming manuals I found in Dad's office. I learned to read the soil, to watch the sky. The physical labor was grueling, but it changed me. The softness left my hands, replaced by calluses. The uncertainty in my heart was slowly being replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. I was tired, bone-tired, at the end of every day, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the weariness of creation, not despair. I found more of my father in that work. I'd be clearing brush and find an old bottle he must have dropped decades ago. I'd be in the workshop and find a note he'd scribbled to himself, a measurement for a project he never finished. He wasn't a ghost haunting the place. He was the foundation it was built on. His presence was in the solid frame of the barn, in the logical layout of the fields, in the stubborn, resilient spirit of the land itself. I wasn't just honoring his memory, I was continuing his work. I was picking up the tools he'd been forced to lay down. One evening, after nearly a year of this new life, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The house was quiet, the fields were peaceful. The work was far from over. It would never be over. But the ranch no longer felt like it was dying. It felt like it was breathing again, like we were breathing together. I thought about my brothers. The anger had faded, replaced by a deep, lingering ache. I hoped one day they would see this place not as the thing that tore us apart, but as the thing that could, perhaps, one day bring us back together. Maybe they would never understand my choice, but maybe they could learn to respect it. Maybe they could see that I hadn't chosen a ghost over them. I had chosen to keep a part of our shared soul alive. The inheritance my father left me wasn't the land. It wasn't the debt. It was the choice. He gave me the chance to discover my own strength, my own purpose. He gave me a reason to become a man he would be proud of. The ranch was the crucible, the place where that transformation had to happen. It was the hardest and most beautiful gift I have ever received. The money from the sale would have been a clean slate, it's true. But my father knew that some of the most beautiful stories aren't written on clean slates. They're written over old lines, on pages full of history, struggle, and love. They're written on the land and in the heart. Looking out over that valley, my valley, I finally understood. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you build. It's a place you fight for. It's a place you earn. And the work was just beginning. Life is a strange and winding road. That choice, made in a storm-swept barn, defined not just the next 5 years, but the rest of my life. The work was harder than I could have ever imagined. There were seasons of drought that tested my faith, and seasons of bounty that renewed it. There were times I was so broke I lived on little more than coffee and eggs from the small flock of chickens I started. There were moments of profound doubt, where the silence of the ranch felt less like peace and more like a judgment. But I was never truly alone. The community my father had built, the one I had slowly been welcomed into, became my bedrock. Earl taught me about crop rotation. Maria from the diner would send over leftovers when she knew I was working late. Mr. Abernathy would stop by, not as a lawyer, but as a friend, bringing stories of my father that filled in the missing pieces of the man I thought I knew. I was building more than a ranch. I was weaving myself back into the fabric of a community, a home. About 3 years in, something unexpected happened. A pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled into my lane. It was David. He got out and stood awkwardly by his truck, looking at the changes I'd made. The new paint on the farmhouse, the mended fences, the small but healthy-looking herd of cattle grazing in the pasture that was once destined to be a golf course. I walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. We stood in silence for a long moment. "It looks good, Leo," he finally said, his voice quiet. "It looks like it used to." "Trying my best," I said. I brought you something," he said, reaching into the bed of his truck and pulling out a small, shivering ball of fur. A border collie puppy. It looked up at me with wide, intelligent eyes. "I know Dad always said a man's not a rancher without a good dog." It was a peace offering, an apology, a bridge across a chasm of angry silence. I took the puppy from him, its warm body trembling in my arms. "Mark is still, well, he's Mark," David said with a sigh. "He's stubborn, but he sees what you're doing. We both do. We were wrong, Leo. We saw this place as a burden. You saw it as a responsibility. Dad knew. He knew what he was doing." We talked for hours that day, sitting on the porch my father had built. He told me about his kids, his job. I told him about the challenges, the small triumphs. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not yet. There were still scars, but it was a beginning. It was a seed of hope planted in the hard soil of our history. 2 years after that, on the 5th anniversary of the day I made my choice, Mr. Abernathy came out to the ranch with the final papers. The stewardship clause was fulfilled. The ranch was legally, unequivocally mine. There was no grand celebration. It was a quiet moment, just me, him, and the loyal dog David had given me, who was now my constant shadow. The feeling wasn't one of victory, but of profound gratitude and of peace. My relationship with David is strong now. He brings his kids out on weekends, and I teach them the things Dad taught me. I see the same light in my nephew's eyes when he looks at the land that my father must have seen in mine. Mark still keeps his distance, but last Christmas I received a card. It just said, "Proud of you, M." It was more than I ever expected. The wound is healing, so here I am, standing on the same porch, looking out at the same valley. The inheritance I received wasn't just a ranch. It was a legacy of resilience. It was a lesson that the easy path is rarely the one that leads to purpose. It taught me that family is more than blood. It's a choice you make every day, to forgive, to understand, and to rebuild. What we inherit from our parents, the good and the bad, the assets and the debts, is just the raw material. It's what we choose to build with it that defines us. My father gave me a pile of broken boards and a mountain of debt, but he also gave me a blueprint for a meaningful life. He trusted me to build it, and that's the real story. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This journey, this ranch, it taught me that you're not defined by the people who underestimate you. You're defined by the promises you choose to keep, especially the ones you make to yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for what you believe in, especially against the people you love, I hope you'll consider subscribing. This channel is a community for people who understand that the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones you can put in a bank. They're the ones you carry in your heart. Please, share your own story in the comments below. What has inheritance, tangible or not, meant in your life? I read every single one because I believe our stories are the bridges that connect us. You're not alone in your struggle or your strength. Thank you for being here.